Hey guys, have a great night. The air tonight feels like it's holding its breath. A velvet darkness stretched across a sky littered with stars, as if the whole universe is leaning closer to hear a story. Out there in the cold wind-swept lands of the ancient Near East, you can almost see the flicker of campfires, smell the smoke, and hear the low murmurs of those gathered close for warmth. It's the kind of night where destinies seem to stir, where the line between dream and prophecy blurs, and in that fragile space, a child is about to be born, who will change the shape of the known world. You, though, might be thinking, I can barely change my bedsheets on time. How am I going to survive all this history? Relax. We'll go slow. And probably you won't survive the 4th century BCE anyway. But in the nicest, most bedtime story sort of way. If you enjoy peaceful bedtime stories like this, please support our channel by subscribing and hitting the like button. Now get cozy, take a deep breath, and let tonight's gentle tale carry you into a wonderful, restful sleep. Feel free to comment where you're listening from and what time it is there. Or maybe just tell us how you're feeling right now. Got a worry, share it. Sometimes just saying it out loud can let the night take it away for a while. Rest your head, slow your thoughts, and together we'll step into a soothing place where dreams begin to bloom. The year is somewhere in the mid-6th century BCE in the ancient Median Empire, a land of rugged mountains, icy winters, and kings who took their dreams very, very seriously. The reigning monarch Astyages drifts into a troubled sleep. In his dream, a vine bursts from his daughter's womb and spreads until it blankets all of Asia. In another, a river of water flows from her body, flooding the land. If this sounds like a weird crossover between National Geographic and Lord of the Rings, you're not wrong. Dreams meant power, and for a king, they meant danger, especially when they hinted that someone else might rule in his place. Astyages consults his Magi, the royal dream. Interpreters, basically the ancient world's mix of psychologists, meteorologists, and gossip columnists. Their verdict, his daughter's child will overthrow him. That's the kind of bedtime story that makes you clutch your crown tighter. Naturally, the king reacts the way ancient kings always did in these situations, with a calculated mix of paranoia and extreme overreaction. He orders that when his daughter Mandain has a child, the infant must not live to see its first sunrise. But fate, as it tends to do in these old stories, has other plans. Mandain gives birth to a boy, rosy-cheeked, startlingly alert, and if you believe later chroniclers already looking faintly like he knew he'd be on coins one day. You're there in the dim light of the birthing chamber, hearing the hushed panic in the air. The midwives glance at one another, wondering if they're witnessing history or treason. The newborn's cry is strong, steady, and oddly defiant. The king entrusts the grim duty to his trusted general Harpagus, a man you can almost feel wrestling with his orders. He knows this is the king's command, but he also knows that killing a baby is the kind of thing that doesn't wash off your conscience with one ceremonial hand-washing. And this is where the first quiet crack in the story appears, that sliver of human mercy that will echo throughout Cyrus's life. Harpagus can't bring himself to do it. Instead, he passes the task to a royal herdsman, Mithridates, assuming that a poor man with a family to feed might find it easier to carry out a dark deed. But when Mithridates brings the child home, his wife, Sparko, has just given birth to a stillborn son. The couple see the infant prince healthy and warm and well. You try explaining to an ancient shepherd's wife that you're about to leave this perfectly fine baby out on a mountain because your boss had a bad dream. So they make a fateful decision. They will raise the boy as their own in the quiet valleys, far from the palace's gaze. Historians still argue whether this was an act of pure compassion, or just a desperate way to replace their lost child. Either way, it works for now. Outside, the wind rakes across the hilltops. You hear the sheep shuffling in their pens, the creak of the wooden door, as Sparko rocks the baby near the fire. And you realize this before he was a king, before he was a conqueror, before he was the Cyrus the Great. He was a child spared by two people who chose kindness over obedience. And in that choice, the course of empires quietly shifted. You wake to a dawn mist curling low in the hollows of the Zagros foothills, the kind of pale silvery light that makes the world feel halfway between dream and day. A rooster calls somewhere far off in that annoyingly self-important way roosters do, and you follow the sound down a narrow dirt path toward the herdsman's hut. Inside, young Cyrus is no longer the fragile newborn swaddled in soft wool. He's a sturdy toddler now, his cheeks flushed from the fire's warmth, eyes darting like he's taking mental notes on everything around him. Sparko hums an old lullaby while mending a tunic, and Mithridates, broad-shouldered and smelling faintly of sheep, sharpens a curved knife for shearing. The boys never far from either of them, toddling after Mithridates to watch the sheepdogs tugging at Sparko's skirts for another piece of warm bread. And to be fair, growing up in a herder's household is basically one long outdoor adventure with a side of chores. The air is clean, the mountains loom blue on the horizon, and the pasture smells of grass wool and the occasional whiff of goat that is, shall we say, memorable. Cyrus learns early to steady himself on rocky slopes, to listen for the low cough of a snow leopard in the hills, and to keep an eye out for snakes sunning themselves on the warm stones. Still, life out here is not without its little trials. Winter nights can freeze the water buckets solid, the wind finds every crack in the hut walls, and on certain days, even the sheep seem to have woken up cranky. But Cyrus absorbs it, all the rhythms of nature, the stubborn patience of herding, the subtle dance between protecting your flock and letting it roam free enough to thrive. You can almost hear the early lessons of leadership sinking in with each bleat and each barking command to the dogs. The royal palace in Ecbatana would have taught him protocol, luxury, and politics. The hills teach him resilience, self-reliance, and maybe the occasional creative insult for a particularly disobedient goat. Harpagus, meanwhile, assumes his delicate problem has been solved. Months turn into years, and the boy he spared fades from his daily worries. The king, too, perhaps lulled by the silence, stops asking after the matter. But the truth is nothing stays hidden forever, especially a child who grows with the quiet confidence of someone destined for more than tending flocks. It's in the village's little open square on a sun-warmed afternoon that the trouble begins. The older boys are playing the game of kings, a kind of make-believe where one child plays the ruler, others his guard servants or loyal subjects. Cyrus, barely into his teens, but already taller than most, is chosen as king. And this is where you see the spark. He doesn't just play along. He commands the game with uncanny seriousness. He appoints guards, issues playful decrees about who can cross the imaginary palace gates, even organizes the punishment of a boy who broke a pretend law. The role fits him like a second skin. His tone is firm but fair, his orders strangely convincing. You can almost imagine him doing this for real. But the boy he punishes happens to be the son of a local nobleman. And that nobleman, not particularly charmed by his son's humiliation, storms to the palace to complain. There's a shepherd's brat in the hills, he tells the court, who thinks he's king already. Someone should have a word with him. Astyages hears this, and something in the back of his mind starts to itch. He has the boy summoned to the palace. Imagine the scene, the vast audience hall, its stone columns rising like forest trunks, carpets thick beneath your feet, the air cool and heavy with the scent of incense. The king sits on his high seat, gazing down at this tall, confident youth, whose eyes hold an unnerving steadiness. Questions follow about his family, his upbringing, his father. Mithridates stands nearby, sweating in his rough tunic. Spako clutches the hem of her dress, praying quietly. And here, historians still argue whether Cyrus himself knew the truth yet. Some say he had whispers from villagers who noticed how unlike his parents he looked. Others believe he was entirely unaware until this very moment, standing before a grandfather who didn't yet know he was looking at his own blood. Astyages orders a quiet investigation. The answers come swiftly. This is indeed the child Mandain bore the child he had ordered to be destroyed. The king turns to Harpagus, the loyal general he trusted to do the unthinkable. You can almost hear the crack of betrayal in the air. It's a dangerous moment, the kind where entire destinies could pivot toward disaster. But for now, Cyrus is spared again, and the shepherd's secret begins to unravel in earnest. The sun hangs low over the ridgelines, throwing long shadows across the palace courtyard as you stand just inside the gates, heart thudding in the silence. Cyrus has been spared for the second time, but the air feels tense like the moments before a storm. Astyages paces slowly in his private chamber, the mosaic floor cool beneath his sandals, his mind wrestling with the visions of his old dreams. The boy is alive. The prophecy breathes again. You can almost feel the weight of his gaze as he studies Cyrus, the strong jaw, the upright posture, the eyes that don't flinch. It's unsettling how the youth already carries himself like a ruler. Still killing him now after all these years would stir suspicion and perhaps even rebellion among the Median nobility. Besides, there's something unnervingly magnetic about him. Astyages decides, for reasons historians still argue over, to let the boy live, but to bring him closer where he can be watched. So Cyrus's life changes overnight. No more windswept hills and bleating sheep. Now he sleeps on thick linen sheets in a stone chamber, eats from silver dishes, and walks marbled corridors lined with carved reliefs of winged bulls and stern gods. Servants bow as he passes. Palace guards with their gleaming bronze helmets glance at him sideways, unsure whether to treat him as a curiosity or a threat. You notice how quickly he adapts. The boy who could whistle a sheepdog into action now studies the ways of the court with the same sharp attention. He learns the Median tongue more fluently, masters the etiquette of bowing to nobles, even begins to read the cuneiform script carved into the palace archives. Still, there's a flicker of restlessness in him, that itch for the open sky, the smell of grass, the freedom to decide his own path. The palace, for all its splendor, is a gilded cage. And like most teenagers in history, Cyrus develops the occasional talent for subtle rebellion. Nothing overt, just small acts. Slipping away to wander the stables. Asking too many questions about why certain laws exist. Listening intently to the palace guard's stories of border skirmishes. If Astyages notices, he doesn't show it, though perhaps he files it away for later. And then there's Harpagus. Poor Harpagus. You can almost see the guilt that clings to him like a second skin. Astyages summons him for a private audience, and here's where the king's paranoia crosses into cruelty. He demands to know why the baby wasn't killed as ordered. Harpagus admits the truth. He handed the child to Mithridates, assuming the shepherd would do the deed. It's not exactly the confession you want to give a man known for imaginative punishments. The retribution is slow, deliberate. Astyages invites Harpagus to a lavish banquet. Platters of roasted meat, fragrant stews, and honey cakes are set before him. Wine flows freely, and then with a smile that must have frozen the blood in his veins, the king reveals the source of the main course, it's Harpagus' own son. That's not the sort of dinner surprise you can recover from with a polite cough. Historians debate whether this macabre tale is literal truth or political legend, but either way, it becomes one of those palace whispers that hang in the air long after the plates are cleared. Cyrus, meanwhile, is growing into a young man whose charisma is becoming impossible to ignore. He doesn't bully the servants. He talks with them. He doesn't boast of his strength. He uses it to settle disputes among the palace boys. He even listens to the gardeners asking which plants thrive in the courtyard shade and which need the full blaze of summer sun. Little by little, people start looking to him, not Astyages, for a certain kind of quiet guidance. In the evenings, he sits with Harpagus, who, despite the horror of his personal tragedy, seems to see in Cyrus a path towards something greater. Their conversations turn to strategy, the mood of the provinces, the limits of Median power. Harpagus speaks in careful terms, planting seeds in Cyrus's mind about leadership, about justice, about the difference between ruling through fear and ruling through respect. And then one day, word reaches the palace that will change everything again. The Persians, that restless subject people to the south, are growing bold. Whispers of discontent ripple through the court. The king thinks little of it at first, until Harpagus' eyes steady, suggest that perhaps Cyrus should be sent to speak with them. It sounds like a simple diplomatic errand, but you can feel the deeper current beneath it, like the undertow in a quiet bay. The boy from the hills is about to return to his own people, and this time he won't be coming back as just another subject of the Median king. The air shifts the moment you step beyond the city walls of Ecbatana. Gone is the heavy perfume of palace corridors, replaced by the sharp, clean scent of the high plains. Your horse's hooves strike the packed earth in an easy rhythm, and the road unfurls ahead like a ribbon, leading you back into something half forgotten. The Persian lands are out there, dry hills, wine-cut valleys and broad skies that make you feel as if the gods themselves are watching. Cyrus rides with a small escort, more ceremonial than protective. Officially, he's on a mission to address minor unrest among the Persians, but the truth, which Harpagus surely knows, runs deeper. This is a homecoming wrapped in diplomacy. You can almost sense the stirrings in Cyrus himself, the pull toward a people whose language, customs, and stubborn pride run in his blood. The Persians welcome him cautiously at first. After all, he's been raised among the Medes, the very people who keep Persia in political chains. But it doesn't take long for him to win them over. In the marketplaces of Anshan, he stops to talk with traders selling bright fabrics and jars of honey. In the fields, he kneels beside farmers to examine the soil between his fingers, asking about the year's harvest. You watch him listen, really listen to the complaints of elders about Median taxes and to the dreams of young warriors itching for freedom. It's a far cry from the perfumed debates of Astyages' court. Here life is simpler but harder. The Persians endure scorching summers, bitter winters, and the constant reminder that they are ruled from afar. They value strength, yes, but also loyalty, and they can smell falsehood the way a shepherd smells rain on the wind. Cyrus doesn't flatter them with empty promises. Instead, he speaks plainly. You are worth more than you are allowed to be. There's an unspoken recognition in their eyes, this is one of us. And that's when the mood begins to shift. Historians still argue whether Harpagus orchestrated what happened next, or simply nudged an inevitable outcome. Either way, the pieces move into place with startling speed. Persian nobles begin to whisper openly about rebellion. Village headmen send word of their support. A loose alliance forms, and at the center of it stands Cyrus, the once hidden shepherd boy, who now carries himself with the confidence of a man who knows his moment has come. Back in Ecbatana, Astyages hears rumors and laughs them off. He has an army, he has wealth, he has decades of power behind him. And Cyrus, he's just a young man playing at kingship. At least that's what Astyages tells himself while he sips wine in the palace garden. But the undercurrents are already strong. In the Persian hills, men sharpen their spears and polish their bronze shields by firelight. Riders carry messages from village to village. Harpagus, now more mentor than general, advises Cyrus on timing strategy and the vital importance of unity. Rebellion is not just about swords and soldiers. It's about convincing people they already deserve what they're fighting for. One cold morning, the decision is made. No fanfare, no trumpet blast, just the quiet understanding that the Persians will no longer bow to the Medes. When the first Median patrol stumbles upon a gathering of armed Persians, it's clear the old order has cracked. The battles that follow are not easy. Median soldiers are well trained, their cavalry swift and disciplined, but the Persians fight with something harder to buy: the fierce will of a people defending their own. They know the hills, the river crossings, the narrow passes where an army can be slowed to a crawl. Cyrus moves among them like a commander, born to the role, steady, decisive, quick to adapt. Astyages, finally taking the threat seriously, marches his full force toward Persia. The clash that follows is brutal, echoing through the valleys. Spears shatter, arrows darken the sky, and the cries of men and horses rise in a storm of chaos. But the Median king finds himself facing not a disorganized uprising, but a coordinated force, one guided by someone who understands both sides of the war. In the end, the Medes falter, some defect mid-battle swayed by Cyrus's reputation. Others simply refuse to fight against kin. By the time the dust settles, the unthinkable has happened. Astyages is captured. The throne of the Medes and the destiny of Persia now stand before Cyrus. No gloating, no reckless vengeance. Just a young man looking steadily at the man who once ordered his death, and deciding that his reign will begin with mercy. The throne room of Ecbatana feels different now. The same carved stone lions guard the doorway, the same columns stretch toward the ceiling's painted beams, but the air has shifted. Astyages, the once mighty king, sits no longer on the high seat. He is brought before Cyrus not in chains, but with the quiet dignity of a man who knows his reign has ended. You stand close enough to see the lines on the old king's face, the weariness in his eyes. Cyrus does not rise from his seat immediately. He lets the silence settle, a silence heavy with decades of fear, rebellion, and prophecy fulfilled. And then, in a move that will surprise friend and foe alike, Cyrus steps down from the dais and takes his grandfather by the arm. No mocking words, no parade of humiliation, just a steady voice. You will not be harmed. The words ripple outward through the hall. A few guards exchange glances. Some of them had braced themselves for a public execution, but Cyrus has no interest in vengeance. He orders that Astyages be treated with respect, given a comfortable estate to live out his days. It's a calculated choice, yes, but also a deeply personal one, a signal that his reign will be different. Historians still argue whether this mercy was born of genuine compassion or clever politics. Mercy, after all, can be a powerful weapon. It breeds loyalty where cruelty would breed revolt. Whatever the motive, the act cements Cyrus's reputation almost instantly. Among the Medes, it disarms potential resistance. Among the Persians, it confirms what they suspected: their new ruler is not just another tyrant. The process of uniting Medes and Persians into one realm begins almost immediately. Cyrus keeps the Median capital Ecbatana as a royal city, but he does not impose one culture over the other. Instead, he blends the best of both. Median nobles retain positions of influence, Persian warriors are given command over key garrisons. It's an empire in embryo stitched together, not just by force, but by careful balance. You watch as messengers ride out in every direction, carrying the news: there is a new ruler, and his word is law. In the villages, people gather in market squares to hear the proclamation read aloud. Some cheer, some remain cautious, but nearly all are curious about this young king who rose from nowhere, or so it seems, to unite two nations. In the palace, Cyrus keeps his routine remarkably open. He holds audiences not only with nobles and generals, but with merchants, priests, and even commoners who have petitions to bring. You hear his questions. How do the taxes fall on your village? What protection do your caravans have from bandits? How is the spring planting? It's not the language of a ruler seeking tribute. It's the tone of someone gathering information to fix what's broken. And yet, the unification is not without challenges. There are border tribes who see the shift in power as a chance to test the young ruler. Skirmishes flare along the northern frontier. In the east, a group of restless chieftains refuses to send their pledged warriors to the royal army. Cyrus answers these challenges with a blend of firmness and diplomacy, sending envoys first but marching personally if needed. One particular meeting stays in your mind: a tense council with a band of northern nomads who had been raiding Median trade routes. Instead of demanding their submission outright, Cyrus invites their leaders into his tent, serves them food, and listens to their grievances. By the end of the night, they agree to halt the raids in exchange for fairer trade terms and the freedom to keep their customs. It's a pattern you'll see again and again, not the suppression of difference, but the weaving of it into a stronger whole. Meanwhile, the infrastructure of a real empire begins to take shape. Roads are repaired and extended, linking distant provinces. Couriers carry messages in record time from the highlands of Media to the plains of Persia. The royal treasury, enriched by the combined resources of both peoples, funds fortifications, irrigation projects, and the expansion of markets. You begin to see it clearly now. Cyrus is not simply a king of the Persians. He is becoming the ruler of something larger, something new, the first flicker of what will be remembered as the Achaemenid Empire. And in the quiet hours when the torches burn low in the palace halls, you can almost hear the whisper of the prophecy that once terrified Astyages. The boy who was spared the youth, who returned to his people, now sits on the throne. And this, you realize, is only the beginning. The great stone gates of Ecbatana swing open to a new rhythm now. Traders from the Caspian coast arrive with carts stacked high with amber and salted fish. Caravans from the Persian heartland roll in with woven carpets and fragrant dates. You stand among them, feeling the bustle of a capital that has shifted from the seat of a single kingdom to the hub of an expanding empire. Cyrus wastes no time in consolidating his rule. He summons the Median nobility, those who once sat comfortably under Astyages, and meets them face to face in the audience hall. The stone reliefs of winged bulls stare down as he speaks plainly. The old quarrels end here. This realm is one. No lengthy speeches, no veiled threats. Just the quiet certainty of someone who knows the ground under his feet belongs to him now. Yet uniting two proud peoples is never as simple as declaring it so. Old loyalties cling stubbornly, and resentment simmers in some corners. Cyrus understands that swords can win a battle, but only trust can hold an empire. So instead of purging the Median aristocracy, he draws them in. Some are given command of military units. Others are assigned governorships in distant provinces. It is a strategy as old as power itself: make yesterday's enemies tomorrow's stakeholders. Still, the young ruler's ambitions don't end at the Median borders. Beyond the mountains to the west lies Lydia, a wealthy kingdom ruled by the famously rich King Croesus. His capital Sardis is a city of gold and marble, where markets overflow with exotic goods and musicians play in shaded courtyards. To the east, nomadic tribes guard the mountain passes. To the south, Babylon looms with its massive walls and storied gardens. Cyrus doesn't just see them as neighbors, he sees them as pieces on a larger board. But first he must ensure the Persian heartland is solidly behind him. You watch him ride out from Ecbatana in a cloak of deep crimson, his escort a mix of Median cavalry and Persian spearmen. In the villages of Fars, he walks among the people without excessive ceremony, greeting farmers by name and asking after their harvest. Children follow him down dusty lanes, laughing when he lifts them onto his horse for a short ride. There's a particular day you remember, a gathering in Pasargadae, a city still modest, but already marked for greatness. The elders sit cross-legged on woven mats in the central square. Cyrus stands before them, a man who has lived both the shepherd's life and the royal's. He speaks of unity, prosperity, and the need for strength against the ambitions of foreign powers. His words are simple, but his tone carries weight, and the elders nod in agreement. Historians still argue whether Cyrus's popularity among the Persians came from his natural charisma or his skill at portraying himself as one of them. Either way, the effect is the same. He becomes less of a distant monarch and more of a shared champion. Harpagus remains at his side, the quiet architect behind much of the strategy. The two men speak often in private maps, spread across wooden tables, the flicker of oil lamps, casting shifting shadows on the walls. Harpagus knows the military strengths of their neighbors and their weaknesses. Cyrus listens, asks questions, and considers each move as if the game were already underway. Meanwhile, Ecbatana hums with preparation. Smiths forge new spearheads. Leatherworkers craft supple armor. Messengers gallop in and out with updates from every frontier. The capital is not yet at war, but it is leaning in that direction like a bowstring drawn and waiting. And then comes the first real test of Cyrus's new power, a rebellion on the empire's eastern flank. A coalition of hill tribes refuses to pay the agreed tribute, raiding trade routes and daring the young king to respond. Some of his advisors urge caution. The empire is still young, they argue. But Cyrus sees the risk in hesitation. A small fire left unchecked can burn the whole field. So he rides east, not with overwhelming force, but with enough to make a statement. He defeats the rebels in a sharp, decisive engagement, then surprises everyone by offering them lenient terms. They are allowed to keep their chieftains and customs so long as they pledge loyalty and open their passes to imperial trade. It's the same pattern you've seen before victory paired with respect. By the time he returns to Ecbatana, the whispers in the markets are no longer about whether Cyrus can hold the empire. They are about where he will go next, and you already know his eyes are turning westward toward the golden kingdom of Lydia. The first cool winds of autumn sweep down from the mountains, carrying with them the scent of rain and the promise of change. You find yourself in the palace courtyard at Ecbatana, watching as grooms ready the king's horses, their manes combed to a silky sheen, their tack polished until it gleams. Cyrus's gaze is fixed westward now, toward the land of Lydia, toward King Croesus, and toward one of the wealthiest realms in the known world. Croesus is a name whispered with awe and a hint of envy. His capital Sardis is said to glitter with gold. The Pactolus River itself runs through the city, depositing flakes of the precious metal into its sands. Merchants from every direction bring their silk, spices, and silver to trade in Sardis's bustling markets. It's the kind of wealth that makes even kings pause, and for a young empire like Cyrus's, the kind that could change everything. But this isn't just about gold. Croesus has allies the Egyptians, the Babylonians, and the Spartans. A victory over Lydia would ripple far beyond its borders, sending a message to the entire ancient world. Persia is not just a new name in politics, it is a power to be reckoned with. Historians still argue over what exactly provoked the conflict. Some say Croesus moved first suspicious of Persia's rise and eager to test its strength before it grew too great. Others claim Cyrus sought confrontation to unify his empire under the banner of conquest. Whatever the truth, the two leaders begin to circle each other like wary predators on the same plane. Cyrus moves deliberately. He sends scouts ahead, gathering intelligence about Lydia's terrain, its fortified cities, and its famed cavalry. His army is a blend of Median heavy horsemen, Persian infantry, and archers drawn from every corner of his realm. Supply lines are carefully arranged. New roads are cleared to speed the march. You can almost hear the beat of the war drums echoing in the mountain passes as the army begins its westward push. The first clashes are sharp and inconclusive skirmishes along the borderlands, where Lydia's cavalry tests the Persian lines. Cyrus studies every engagement like a chess match, noting where the Lydian horses turn quickest, where their armor is strongest, and how their commanders respond under pressure. He doesn't rush the campaign. He lets the rhythm of war reveal itself. And then comes the decisive moment, the Battle of Timbra. The plains stretch wide beneath a cold winter sky, the ground hard underfoot. Croesus deploys his cavalry in glittering formation, confident they will smash through the Persian lines, as they have done so many times before. But Cyrus has a trick. He lines his front with camels, yes, camels, animals unfamiliar to Lydian horses, whose scent unsettles and scatters them. As the cavalry hesitates, the Persian infantry advances with disciplined precision, cutting through the gaps. The battle turns swiftly. Croesus retreats to Sardis, hoping to regroup and await reinforcements. But Cyrus moves faster than expected, surrounding the city before aid can arrive. For 2 weeks, the siege tightens. Ladders scrape against the walls, arrows arc overhead, and rams thud against the gates. Finally, the defences crack. The fall of Sardis could have been a moment of brutal sack and slaughter, and many in Cyrus's army likely expect it to be. But once again, he chooses mercy. Croesus is captured alive and treated with dignity. There's even a story perhaps embroidered by later storytellers that when Croesus asked Cyrus what gave him the right to seize his kingdom, Cyrus replied simply, "Your own ambition did." Whether true or not, the message is clear: conquest in Cyrus's hands is about more than spoils. The Lydian people are spared wholesale destruction. Their capital remains intact, their markets reopen, and their artisans return to work. Cyrus appoints trusted governors, but leaves much of Lydia's local administration in place. Gold still flows from the Pactolus, but now it enriches the Persian treasury. As you stand on a high terrace in Sardis, looking down at the bustling streets that only weeks ago were under siege, you begin to understand the deeper strategy. By preserving Lydia's prosperity, Cyrus not only wins its resources, he wins its cooperation. And in the grand game of empire, cooperation is worth more than gold. The streets of Sardis hum again with the clink of coin and the sing-song calls of market vendors. The siege is already drifting into memory, replaced by the daily rhythm of trade. You drift through the stalls, with Cyrus noticing how his presence does not silence the people as a conqueror's might. Instead, merchants call out greetings, children scamper between baskets of figs and pomegranates, and elders step forward to clasp his hands. He listens, always. A goldsmith tells him how business collapsed during the siege, but will recover if caravans feel safe again. A farmer asks for repairs to the aqueduct damaged in the fighting. A widow quietly requests relief from taxes until her vineyard recovers. And Cyrus, in a manner that has already become a hallmark of his rule, takes notes through his aides promising follow-up instead of empty words. Croesus, the king, whose name was once synonymous with unimaginable wealth, now walks beside him as an advisor rather than a rival. Yes, advisor. In a twist that historians still debate, Cyrus spares not just Croesus's life, but his dignity. Some say Croesus even counseled him on the value of preserving conquered cities rather than razing them. If that's true, it might explain why Sardis was treated not as a vanquished foe, but as a jewel to be polished and set in the crown of the empire. Still, Cyrus is not naive. He knows Lydia's loyalty is fragile. Gold has a way of making men restless. So he strengthens the garrison station's loyal officers and quietly places Lydian nobles under a kind of watchful friendship. It's a balancing act, trust enough to win hearts, vigilance enough to keep daggers from appearing in the dark. From Sardis, the Persian king's attention stretches further west. The Aegean coast is dotted with rich Greek cities, Miletus, Ephesus, and others, each fiercely independent, each jealous of its autonomy. They have long dealt with Lydia as trading partners or occasional enemies. Now they must decide whether to deal with Persia as subjects. Cyrus approaches them with the same blend of firmness and flexibility that has become his signature. Envoys carry terms, pay tribute, and keep your local laws, or resist and face the might of the empire. Some calculating the odds agree quickly. Others, stubborn as Greek city-states, tend to take up arms. The resulting skirmishes are brief but sharp. One by one, the coastal cities fall into the Persian orbit. It's not just land Cyrus gains, it's access to the sea. Persian ships now sail from Aegean ports carrying goods across waters that were once closed to them. The empire's reach is stretching like a vine across the known world, and each conquest seems less about destruction than about weaving a tighter network of power. Back in Sardis, a different kind of campaign unfolds. Roads radiate outward from the city, like spokes from a wheel smoothed and widened for the swift movement of troops, messengers, and merchants. Persian coinage begins to circulate alongside Lydian gold staters, binding the economies together. Cyrus even encourages intermarriage between Persian officials and local families, a quiet way of blending bloodlines with politics. You notice something curious: the people of Lydia, while still proud of their heritage, are beginning to speak of themselves not just as Lydians, but as subjects of the king. And when they say the king, they don't mean some abstract throne in a far-off land. They mean Cyrus. There's a story, likely half legend, about a Lydian merchant who once asked Cyrus what he planned to do with all the wealth of Sardis. The king supposedly replied, "Use it to make you richer, so that you have more to protect." It's the sort of line that might be polished by history's storytellers, but it captures the essence of his approach. He binds people to him by ensuring their prosperity depends on his reign. By the time spring paints the hills around Sardis in wildflowers, the city feels less like a conquered prize and more like a thriving provincial capital. Yet even in this success, Cyrus's mind is turning east again. For beyond Lydia lies the greatest prize of all, a city whispered about with awe across the ancient world, its name heavy with legend and power. Babylon, the hanging gardens, the walls so thick that chariots can race along them. A city said to hold the wealth of centuries. And for Cyrus, it is the next step in the shaping of an empire, the likes of which the world has never seen. The name Babylon carries its own kind of gravity. Even before you see its colossal walls rising from the plains, the stories hang in the air, tales of gardens suspended in the sky, of streets so wide, chariots can race in both directions, of temples glittering with gold. It is the jewel of Mesopotamia, the seat of kings, and a city whose very existence seems to whisper, "We have always been here, and we will outlast you." But Cyrus has no illusions. He knows that Babylon is not invincible, and he also knows it is not merely a city, but a symbol. To take Babylon is to claim the heart of the ancient Near East. To govern it well is to prove himself not just as a conqueror, but as a ruler for all peoples. The political moment is ripe. Nabonidus, the current king of Babylon, is, let's call him eccentric. Historians still argue whether he was a visionary priest-king or an absent-minded tyrant. What is certain is that he alienated the city's powerful priests by favoring the moon god Sin over Marduk, Babylon's patron deity. Imagine running a city where your first move is to upset the most influential religious leaders. That's not the kind of leadership choice you find in Management for Dummies. Meanwhile, Nabonidus has spent long stretches away from the city, leaving his son Belshazzar in charge. And while Belshazzar is famously remembered in biblical lore for that awkward writing on the wall incident, his political resume is thin. Discontent simmers in Babylon's streets, and the priest merchants and common folk alike begin to wonder if the city's golden age has faded. Cyrus approaches with care. He sends envoys ahead promising respect for Babylonian traditions, protection for its temples, and relief from unpopular royal policies. His army advances through Mesopotamia with calculated precision, securing key towns and supply routes. There's a crucial crossing at Opis, where resistance stiffens, but the Persian forces break through. Soon the road to Babylon lies open. And here's where the campaign takes a twist worthy of a strategist's handbook. Instead of a long, grinding siege, Cyrus employs guile. The Euphrates River flows through Babylon, both a blessing and a weakness. His engineers divert part of the river's course, lowering the water level, until soldiers can wade through the shallows beneath the massive gates. On a moonless night they slip into the city with scarcely a sound. When dawn comes, there is no smoking ruin, no cries of slaughter. The gates stand open, the streets are intact, and Babylon has fallen not to fire and chaos, but to strategy and restraint. The people wake to find Persian banners fluttering where Babylonian ones flew the day before. Cyrus enters not as a ravager, but as a liberator. He heads straight for the great temple of Marduk, offering prayers and making sacrifices in honor of the god. The priests, long estranged from Nabonidus, welcome him warmly. Decrees are issued in the king's name, guaranteeing the safety of the city's inhabitants, their property, and their religious institutions. And then comes one of his most remarkable acts, the freeing of captive peoples. Among them are the Jews exiled in Babylon for decades after the destruction of Jerusalem. Cyrus orders that they may return to their homeland, rebuild their temple, and resume their worship. It is a gesture that earns him a place not only in history books, but in sacred scripture. To this day, he is remembered in the Hebrew Bible as a chosen instrument of restoration. To commemorate his policies, the famous Cyrus Cylinder is inscribed a baked clay document that historians later hail as one of the earliest declarations of human rights. On it, Cyrus describes returning displaced peoples to their homes and restoring the temples of their gods. It's a far cry from the usual "I conquered them and took their stuff" style of ancient royal boasting. Walking through the streets of newly captured Babylon, you see why this approach works. The markets are already open again, incense smoke curls from temple altars, and families gather in courtyards as if the city had not just changed hands. Instead of resentment, there's a cautious curiosity, even a sense of relief. In the palace gardens, Cyrus speaks with Babylonian officials under the shade of date palms. His tone is neither that of a distant monarch, nor an occupying general. He asks about irrigation systems, about grain supplies, about the state of the city's archives. He listens, nods, and delegates repairs. The empire, you realize, is being stitched together not just by victories, but by careful promises kept. The Persian king now holds the richest city in the world, and yet, as the sun sets over the ziggurats casting long shadows over the river, you sense that Cyrus's ambition is not sated. This isn't the end of his journey, only the opening of the next chapter, in a vision that keeps stretching like the empire itself toward the horizon. The late afternoon light in Babylon turns everything gold. The walls, the domes, even the slow shimmering curve of the Euphrates. You stand on a terrace beside Cyrus, watching the city breathe in its new chapter. Below, barges slide along the river, their sails catching the wind. In the distance, children's laughter drifts across the courtyards. For a city freshly conquered, it is astonishingly calm. Cyrus wastes no time in shaping Babylon's governance. His orders are clear. The people will keep their language, their laws, and their gods. Temples are to be restored, priesthoods reinstated. Any religious festivals suppressed under Nabonidus are revived. The message is unmistakable. This king does not seek to replace Babylon's soul, only to guard it. It's a move that wins allies quickly. The high priests of Marduk, once wary of foreign rule, now sing hymns in Cyrus's honor. Merchants return to the city's processional way, their stalls laden with lapis lazuli cinnamon and fine wool. Farmers in the surrounding countryside resume planting, confident that their harvest will not be seized without payment. And then there is the matter of the exiles. You see the announcement spread through the streets like a whispered blessing. Any people displaced by Babylon's wars may return to their homelands. Among the most overjoyed are the Jewish community who have spent nearly 70 years in exile. In synagogues and family homes, prayers of thanks rise for a king who, though not of their faith, has granted them a gift they had almost stopped hoping for. Historians still argue whether this policy sprang from political pragmatism or genuine conviction. Perhaps it was both. Cyrus understood that people rooted in their own lands, practicing their own traditions, were less likely to rebel. At the same time, there's little doubt he valued stability built on mutual respect. In the heart of Babylon, a team of scribes carves these decrees into clay, the now famous Cyrus cylinder. You run your fingers over the wedge-shaped cuneiform, reading the words as they proclaim the return of gods and people to their rightful places. It is in essence a manifesto for ruling a multi-ethnic empire without breaking it apart. But Babylon, for all its grandeur, also tests the limits of even the most benevolent ruler. Its wealth draws ambitious men like moths to a flame. Local governors jockey for influence, sometimes quietly resisting Persian oversight. There are whispered plots in the shaded porticos of noble villas. Cyrus deals with them, as he always does, first with dialogue, then, if necessary, with decisive firmness. One such challenge comes from a coalition of Babylonian nobles unhappy with the new order. Instead of ordering their arrest, Cyrus summons them to the palace. You watch the scene. Men in embroidered robes stand stiffly as the king questions them, one by one. He asks not only about their grievances, but about their visions for Babylon's future. By the end of the meeting, half have been offered posts within the imperial administration. The rest leave knowing they have been heard, and knowing the king's patience has limits. In quieter moments, Cyrus walks the processional way past lions carved in glazed brick, past stalls selling roasted lamb and honey cakes. He pauses to speak with a potter about the quality of the clay this season. He lingers with a scribe to ask how quickly court documents can be copied. It's a habit he developed long before he wore the crown, the instinct to see for himself, rather than rely entirely on reports. His evenings in Babylon are often spent in the palace gardens, where channels of water feed rows of date palms and pomegranate trees. Sometimes Croesus joins him, offering counsel seasoned by his own rise and fall. Sometimes Harpagus is there, reviewing maps by lamplight, marking the edges of lands still beyond the empire's grasp. One night, as the lamps flicker in the warm breeze, Cyrus leans over the map and rests his hand on the eastern frontier. Beyond lie the highlands and deserts, where nomadic tribes roam lands rich in horses, skilled riders, and if rumour is true, fierce queens who do not bow easily to kings. For now Babylon is his, but his gaze, steady as the flow of the river beside the palace, is already drifting toward new horizons. The dawn in Babylon is soft, the river mist curling upward as sunlight gilds the tops of the ziggurats. The markets are not yet open, and the city feels like it's holding its breath. You walk alongside Cyrus as he slips quietly through the winding streets, dressed not in royal splendor, but in the plain cloak of a traveler. This is how he prefers to see his cities, not from the palace balcony, but from ground level, where the real life of an empire happens. The guards trail at a discreet distance, while Cyrus pauses to greet an old woman sweeping the threshold of her home. She blinks at him surprised, then chuckles as he asks about her health and whether the bread prices have gone up. He speaks to a fisherman mending his net by the river, to a young apprentice loading clay jars into a cart. Each conversation is brief but personal, a reminder that the king is not a distant shadow in a marble hall, but a man who notices the details of their lives. Historians still argue whether these morning walks were calculated acts of political theatre or the habits of a genuinely curious ruler. Either way they worked. In an empire so vast and diverse, the simple fact that its king would listen mattered. Word of these strolls spread, and soon in distant provinces, people began telling their neighbours, "He walks among us." Sometimes the walks led him to unexpected truths. Once in a side street, he found a scribe's workshop piled high, with petitions, grievances from farmers, traders, and soldiers most unanswered for months. Instead of reprimanding the scribe on the spot, Cyrus quietly collected several scrolls and read them himself. Within days the complaints were addressed, and soon after he ordered a system where petitions would be reviewed weekly, no matter where they came from in the empire. In the palace, Cyrus carried this listening habit into the grand audience hall, but the tone there was different, a balance between approachability and authority. He would let a merchant plead his case about unfair tariffs, then turn to a governor and hold him accountable for enforcing them. His manner was patient, but the message was unmistakable. Justice was not optional in this empire. One day a group of elders from a remote village on the Persian plateau made the long journey to Babylon. They brought with them nothing but a carved wooden staff, a symbol of their leadership. When they finally stood before Cyrus, they explained in the plain, unpolished words of herders that their grazing lands had been encroached upon by wealthier neighbors. Cyrus asked questions until he understood the matter in full. Then instead of issuing a decree from his throne, he said simply, "We will walk the boundary together." And so he did a king, pacing a dusty line in the highlands, deciding where fairness lay. There was a story told in hushed tones around market fires about a thief caught stealing grain from a noble's storehouse. The noble demanded execution. Cyrus summoned both men and heard them out. It turned out the thief was a farmer whose crops had failed and whose children were starving. Cyrus ordered the noble to provide grain until the next harvest, and in return, the farmer was to work the noble's fields to repay the debt. Neither man left entirely happy, but both left alive, and the settlement held. It is this habit, listening before judging, that gives Cyrus's empire a rare stability. Of course, there were still those who mistook kindness for weakness. A satrap in the east tried to levy extra taxes for his personal gain. A palace official in Babylon skimmed off the tolls collected at the river docks. Neither lasted long. Cyrus's justice might be merciful, but it was never blind. On warm evenings after a day of such encounters, Cyrus would sometimes sit with Harpagus and Croesus in the palace gardens. The air smelled of jasmine, and the sound of water trickling through channels softened the heat. They would speak of governance, of the delicate art of keeping so many peoples loyal. Croesus, with a wry smile, often reminded him, "It is easier to conquer a city than to keep it content." Cyrus knew this well, and as he gazed out over the darkening city, its lamps winking on one by one, he understood that the empire's strength lay not in the height of its walls, but in the willingness of its people to believe in the man who ruled them. The sky over Babylon glows with the pale blush of morning, and the streets are already waking the clatter of clay jars being stacked, the creak of wagon wheels, the murmured bargaining between bakers and their first customers. But today, Cyrus's mind is elsewhere. Word has come from the north and east unrest is brewing among certain provinces. Not the kind that shakes an empire to its foundations, but the sort that left alone will fester. Cyrus gathers his advisers in the audience hall, the sunlight spilling across the inlaid brick floor. Harpagus, ever the realist, suggests swift military action. Croesus, leaning on his staff with the weary grace of experience, recommends negotiation. Cyrus listens without interrupting his familiar habit before finally speaking. "We will not strike first," he says. "We will talk. And if they will not listen, we will show them mercy even in victory." Mercy in the ancient world is about as common as a goat who volunteers for shearing. Yet Cyrus uses it not as a sign of softness, but as a deliberate tool of statecraft. When he does ride out to confront rebels, he makes a point of offering generous terms before the first sword is drawn. Most see the wisdom in accepting. Those who do not often find themselves defeated and then surprised to be spared. One story drifts back from the frontier. A rebellious satrap is brought before Cyrus in chains, expecting the executioner's blade. Instead, Cyrus removes the chains and tells him, "You have a choice. Serve me better than you served yourself, or walk away now and live elsewhere." The satrap shaken kneels on the spot and swears loyalty. Historians still argue whether this man's service afterward was out of gratitude or fear of squandering a second chance. In Babylon itself, Cyrus's policy of mercy manifest in subtler ways. A noble court cheating the temple out of grain taxes is not stripped of all property, but ordered to fund a public granary. A group of soldiers guilty of extorting merchants is not put to death, but made to guard the very trade routes they once plundered without pay, until they have made restitution. It's justice that corrects rather than simply punishes, and it makes a lasting impression on the watching populace. Yet Cyrus is not naive. He understands that mercy works best when paired with a clear display of power. The imperial army drills regularly in the parade grounds outside Babylon, their lines of spearmen bristling in the sun. New fortifications rise along the frontier roads. The message is unmistakable. The king is kind, but he is also capable of overwhelming force. There's a moment you witness in the palace gardens that captures his balance perfectly. A delegation from the far western coast has come to complain about a corrupt governor. Cyrus listens, nodding gravely. The governor standing beside them shifts uncomfortably. When the grievances are finished, Cyrus thanks the delegates, then turns to the governor, and in a voice as calm as the flowing fountains nearby, relieves him of his post on the spot. The decision is final, the punishment decisive, but there's no public shaming. The man simply walks away knowing the king's favor is gone, and with it, his power. Some evenings Cyrus dines not with nobles, but with soldiers, merchants, or craftsmen. He asks about their work, their families, their concerns. Once, sharing bread with a group of stonemasons repairing a palace wall, he jokes that they're the only ones truly keeping his empire from crumbling, and they laugh, not because he's the king, but because he's right. This willingness to cross the invisible lines between ruler and ruled is what keeps so many people loyal. In a land where most kings are distant figures, glimpsed only in parades or heard about through decrees, Cyrus's accessibility feels revolutionary. It also makes betrayal harder. After all, it's one thing to rebel against a faceless throne, and quite another to turn against the man who once asked about your sick child or helped repair your town's well. By night, the city of Babylon glitters under thousands of oil lamps. The palace windows aglow. From the high terraces, you can see the light stretching along the riverbanks, fading into the dark horizon. Somewhere beyond that darkness lie new challenges, new frontiers, and in Cyrus's mind, the quiet conviction that his greatest victories will not be measured in battles won, but in enemies turned into allies. The palace at Babylon smells faintly of warm bread this morning. The bakers in the royal kitchens have been busy since before dawn, their ovens crackling. Cyrus moves through the colonnaded halls with his usual steady pace, nodding to servants greeting guards by name. Today's audience is not with nobles or soldiers, but with merchants and artisans, the lifeblood of the empire's economy. They gather in the audience hall, their clothes a patchwork of the empire itself. Lydian linen tunics, Babylonian wool robes, Persian riding coats. Each has come to discuss trade routes, taxation, and as always, money. Cyrus listens intently, leaning forward on his throne as a caravan master describes bandit attacks on the road to Susa. A potter explains the cost of clay has risen because barges carrying river silt have been delayed by damaged canals. A jeweler complains about counterfeit coinage creeping into the markets. It would be easy to nod politely, promise to look into it, and send them away, the standard royal response in most courts. But Cyrus takes each matter seriously. He asks the caravan master about the locations of the attack's orders repairs to the canals that feed the potter's clay supply, and commands a review of minting practices to root out fake coinage. Within days his orders are in motion. The merchants leave not just heard, but helped, and word spreads quickly that under this king, speaking up changes things. Cyrus's personal wealth is vast. The treasury overflows with tribute taxes and the spoils of conquest. But instead of hoarding it in hidden vaults, he invests it back into the empire. New roads are cut through the mountains, shortening travel between key cities. Bridges rise over wide rivers, their stone arches strong enough to carry both wagons and armies. Caravans travel faster and safer than ever before, and in return, trade booms. The benefits reach far beyond merchants. Farmers in distant provinces suddenly find new markets for their grain and fruit. Craftsmen in Lydia sell their gold work to customers in Susa. Persian weavers trade carpets in Babylon. Wealth flows not just to the capital, but back into the towns and villages that produce it. It's a cycle that strengthens the entire empire. Still, Cyrus is not blind to the dangers of wealth. Too much gold can make a man careless, and too much power in the hands of a few can unbalance the realm. So he takes steps to prevent monopolies from strangling smaller traders. When a group of Babylonian merchants tries to fix grain prices to squeeze out competitors, Cyrus intervenes directly. He calls them to the palace, listens to their excuses, and then orders the grain sold at fair market rates under royal supervision. The message is clear: commerce will flourish, but greed will not go unchecked. There's a lighter side to all this prosperity. Festivals grow more lavish, with music, dance, and food enough to feed entire neighborhoods. You attend one in the Babylonian quarter. Musicians pluck lutes, while dancers in bright sashes whirl between tables laden with roast lamb figs and honeyed pastries. Children dart through the crowd with sticky fingers, merchants haggle good-naturedly over trinkets, and even soldiers relax for the night. Cyrus appears briefly, not in royal robes, but in a simple tunic to greet the people. A cheer rises, not staged, but genuine. Historians still argue whether Cyrus's generosity sprang from a calculated understanding of empire or from a personal distaste for the hoarding and excess he saw in other kings. Perhaps it was both. What's certain is that his spending habits built loyalty in ways armies could not. And there's one more thread in this tapestry of generosity patronage of the arts. Cyrus funds stonemasons to carve reliefs in palaces, scribes to copy sacred texts, and artisans to craft ceremonial vessels. In Pasargadae, his chosen city in Persia, he begins work on gardens fed by ingenious irrigation channels, places meant not just for royal leisure but for the enjoyment of visitors from across the empire. These projects employ hundreds, feed thousands, and leave behind beauty as enduring as his conquests. One evening, as you walk the palace gardens, the fragrance of night-blooming jasmine on the breeze, Cyrus remarks almost casually, "An empire without joy is no empire at all." He says it as if he's talking about the weather, but you can see it's a philosophy that runs deep. Wealth in his hands is not a trophy. It's a tool to build, to bind, and to brighten the lives of those under his rule. The late afternoon sun slants across the palace courtyard, turning the limestone columns the color of warm honey. Cyrus sits at a long cedar table, a map unfurled before him, the inked lines showing the sweep of the empire, and beyond it, lands not yet under Persian rule. His hand moves slowly, tracing borders not as barriers, but as bridges to be built. For Cyrus, diplomacy is as much a weapon as the spear. Where others might charge armies through hostile territory, he prefers first to send words weighted, deliberate, and sharpened in their own way. Messengers ride out from Babylon with sealed letters, some bearing offers of alliance, others proposing trade agreements. Still, others extending invitations to visit the royal court. It is a subtle game. In Cappadocia, he sends gifts of fine Persian horses to a local ruler, knowing the gesture will open more doors than threats. In the Levant, he promises the protection of coastal cities' trade routes in exchange for their loyalty. With nomadic tribes on the empire's fringes, he trades silk and grain for safe passage and the service of their famed horse archers. Historians still argue whether Cyrus's skill lay more in genuine empathy or in strategic charm. The truth is probably both. He seems to have an instinct for reading people, sensing when to press, when to retreat, and when to offer exactly what the other party didn't realize they wanted. One delegation from a mountain kingdom arrives in Babylon, expecting to be bullied into submission. Instead, they are greeted with music feasts and a tour of the city's great gardens. Cyrus listens to their concerns about losing autonomy, then proposes a treaty in which they keep their own rulers, but swear allegiance to the Persian crown. They accept and leave not as conquered subjects, but as partners, albeit ones who now march under his banner. And then there's the famously tense meeting with an emissary from Egypt. The man is blunt, even defiant, warning Cyrus not to set his sights on the Nile. Instead of taking offense, Cyrus smiles faintly and pours the envoy a cup of wine. Empires, he says, are like rivers. They run their course and sometimes they meet. The conversation ends without a deal, but without hostility. The seed is planted. You watch him in these negotiations and notice his patience. He is never in a rush to close a deal. Sometimes he will let an offer sit for weeks, allowing the other side to reconsider or soften. Other times, he will move swiftly, sensing a fleeting opportunity. It's a rhythm not unlike hunting stillness until the exact moment to strike. This diplomacy extends inside the empire as well. Governors from distant provinces are invited to Babylon, not just to report on their territories, but to mingle with one another. At feasts, Cyrus deliberately seats rival satraps side by side, ensuring they talk and perhaps realize that working together under his rule is far easier than squabbling without him. One evening, during a banquet lit by hundreds of oil lamps, Cyrus raises a cup and toasts to the peace that is worth more than gold. It is not empty sentiment. His empire is vast, stretching from the Aegean coast to the edges of Central Asia. Yet, for much of his reign, it is remarkably stable. Roads are safe markets, busy borders secure. This is no accident. It is the result of weaving diplomacy into every layer of governance. Of course, not all talks end in harmony. Some rulers mistake his courtesy for weakness, thinking they can stall or deceive him. They learn quickly that while Cyrus prefers words to war, he is not afraid to move from one to the other. A border prince who reneges on an alliance wakes one morning to find Persian soldiers camped outside his walls. The siege is short, the surrender quick, and the new treaty far less generous than the first. In quiet moments, you see him reviewing correspondence by lamplight. Scrolls from satraps, letters from allies, reports from envoys. He reads them all, often annotating in the margins. Sometimes he smiles at a clever turn of phrase. Other times his jaw tightens at news of treachery. But always he responds. In a world where many rulers treat communication as a one-way decree, Cyrus keeps the lines alive. It's diplomacy not as theatre, but as architecture. The careful construction of trust, the laying of foundations that can carry the weight of an empire. And as you look again at the map before him, you realize he's not just seeing borders. He's seeing possibilities. The winter winds sweep across the open steppe like a living thing, cold, sharp, and full of a restlessness that seems to belong to the land itself. Out here, far beyond the marble courtyards of Babylon or the stone terraces of Sardis, life is raw. The horizon is endless, broken only by low hills and the occasional ribbon of river, and the sky feels impossibly wide. Cyrus rides at the head of a small column wrapped in a thick felt cloak, the fur-lined hood pulled low against the cold. These are the lands of the nomads riders who seem to be born in the saddle, their lives woven into the rhythm of the horse. The empire has reached their borders, but their loyalty is not a given. They value freedom as much as they value the breath in their lungs, and they have little patience for kings who demand tribute without understanding their ways. The Persians have clashed with them before. Skirmishes along the frontier are not uncommon, but this time, Cyrus comes not to fight but to speak. A camp appears in the distance, a scattering of round felt yurt smoke curling from their central vents. Children in sheepskin coats watch the riders approach, calling out warnings to their elders. The smell of wood smoke and roasting mutton drifts on the wind. The tribal leaders emerge wrapped in thick cloaks of wool and fur, their hair braided and bound with leather cords. Their wary eyes narrowing at the sight of the Persian king. Here, titles mean little. A man is measured by his deeds, his courage, and whether his word holds true. Cyrus dismounts a small gesture, but one that speaks volumes. He does not tower over them from horseback. He stands as an equal, letting the snow crunch under his boots. The greetings are brief, the words chosen carefully. He speaks of trade routes, of the dangers of raiders, from even further north of the value in alliance. He offers not subjugation, but partnership, Persian goods and grain in exchange for horses and the service of their riders in times of war. There is a long pause. Then an older chieftain steps forward, his face weathered by decades of wind and sun. He asks a question that historians still repeat. Why should we fight for you, king of cities? Cyrus's answer is quiet but firm. Because I will fight for you, king of the steppe. That night the talks continue around a roaring fire inside the largest yurt. Cups of fermented mare's milk pass from hand to hand. Stories are traded not just of battles, but of hunt storms and the long journeys of the herds. Cyrus listens as much as he speaks, asking about the best grazing grounds, the river crossings that freeze late in the season, the omens they trust before taking a long ride. By the time the sun rises, an agreement is reached. The tribes will ride under the Persian banner when called, but they will keep their ways, their leaders, and their autonomy. In return, they will have the empire's protection against rival clans and foreign invaders. The formalities are sealed not with a written treaty, but with an exchange of gifts. Cyrus presents a finely worked sword, its hilt inlaid with lapis and gold. The chieftain offers a bow of horn and sinew powerful enough to pierce armor. These are not mere tokens, they are symbols of trust. As the Persians ride away, a group of young horsemen gallop alongside for a time, showing off their skill, standing on their saddles, loosing arrows into the air, whooping into the wind. You can see Cyrus watching them with the faintest smile, as though imagining their place in the battles to come. Historians sometimes overlook these alliances, on the empire's fringes, focusing instead on the glittering capitals and famous conquests. But here on the open steppe, Cyrus shows the same genius he displayed in Babylon or Sardis, the ability to make people feel seen, respected, and worth fighting beside. By the time the column disappears into the southward hills, the nomads have begun speaking of him not as an outsider, but as the king who keeps his word. And in lands where memory is long and betrayal is never forgiven, that title may be worth more than any crown. The steppe winds fade behind you as the land shifts into rolling plains, then into rugged foothills. Winter is loosening its grip now, but the air is still sharp enough to sting your lungs. Cyrus rides at the center of his column, his cloak gathered tightly, his eyes fixed eastward. This is no trading journey or diplomatic mission. It is the beginning of a campaign, one that will lead him into some of the most unforgiving territory of his reign. Word has reached him of the Massage Day, a fierce confederation of tribes who roam the lands beyond the Jaxartes River. They are said to be unmatched in mounted combat, their warriors adorned with gold ornaments and armed with long spears and deadly bows. They live by hunting, raiding, and the keeping of vast herds, and they bow to no king. Their leader is Queen Tamiris, a name spoken with both admiration and wariness. Historians still argue about what provoked this campaign. Some claim the Massagetæ threatened Persian borderlands. Others say Cyrus sought to bring them under his banner before they could grow too strong. A few even suggest personal ambition, the desire to test himself against a leader as formidable as Tamiris. Whatever the cause, the decision is made. The Persian army moves in stages, building supply caches along the way. Engineers reinforce bridges, scouts map river crossings, and smiths repair armor and weapons for the months ahead. This is not a hasty charge. It is a slow tightening of the net. Cyrus knows the dangers of underestimating an enemy who knows the land better than he does. As the army approaches the Jaxartes, an embassy from Tamiris arrives under a flag of truce. The envoys are tall, broad-shouldered, their fur-trimmed cloaks smelling faintly of smoke and horse. They deliver her message plainly. Turn back, Cyrus. Rule your own lands. Cross this river, and you will find nothing but death. Cyrus listens without anger. He dismisses the envoys with gifts and sends his own messengers in return, offering terms for alliance generous ones by the standards of empire. But Tomyris refuses. Her reply is sharp, her pride unbent. So Cyrus prepares to cross the river. His plan is cunning, feign weakness, lure part of the Massagetæ force into battle on Persian ground, and strike hard. He leaves behind a camp stocked with wine and food, knowing the nomad's reputation for celebrating victory with abandon. The trap works. A Massagetæ detachment falls upon the camp, finds the stores, and indulges heavily. At dawn, Persian forces sweep in, capturing or killing many among them. According to some accounts, Tomyris' own son, Spargopyses. When news reaches her, Tomyris' grief turns to fury. She sends a message that is half curse, half challenge. Cyrus, glutton for blood, do not deceive yourself that you have triumphed. If you thirst for battle, I will give you your fill. And so, the armies meet. The battle is long and brutal. The Massagetæ fight with the wild precision of born horsemen, loosing arrows at full gallop, wheeling away before the Persian infantry can close. The Persians counter with disciplined ranks and relentless pressure, pushing the nomads toward the river. Spears clash, arrows fall like rain, the ground churns to mud under pounding hooves. In the chaos, it is hard to say which side gains the upper hand. Some accounts claim the Massagetæ are broken and scattered. Others say they hold the field, inflicting heavy losses before retreating into the steppe. What is certain is that both sides pay dearly. That night the Persian camp is silent save for the low murmur of the watch. Fires burn low. The men are exhausted, their faces shadowed in the flickering light. Cyrus walks among them, speaking quietly to captains, offering a hand on a soldier's shoulder. There is no boasting tonight, only the steady knowledge that this is not over. The Queen's forces are still out there waiting in the dark, and the Jaxartes runs cold and fast under the moon. You can almost feel it, the tension in the air, the sense that the final reckoning between Cyrus and Tomyris has yet to come. The morning after the battle breaks cold and clear, the pale light glinting off patches of frost that cling stubbornly to the grass. In the Persian camp, the fires burn low, men eat in silence, and the air carries the weight of unfinished business. Cyrus moves among his soldiers, his boots crunching on the frozen ground, speaking with the quiet steadiness of a commander who knows the fight is not yet won, but also not yet lost. The scouts return with word Tomyris' forces have withdrawn deeper into the steppe. To some, this looks like retreat, but Cyrus knows better. The Massagetæ are masters of the land. They vanish only to choose the time and place of the next strike. Chasing them blindly would be folly. Still, he cannot simply wait. Supplies will dwindle, the men's morale will erode, and the bitter cold will do the enemy's work for them. So he orders the army forward in careful stages, never straying far from water sources, always fortifying the knight's camp. You ride with them, watching the land change, the river winding like a silver serpent, the horizon stretching into an unbroken expanse of ochre grass and pale sky. Historians still argue about what happened next. Some accounts say Cyrus pursued too far, drawn deep into hostile territory. Others claim Tomyris set her own trap, allowing the Persians to advance until they were stretched thin, then closing in with the full force of her cavalry. Whatever the truth, the meeting comes suddenly, a storm breaking on open ground. The Massagetæ descend like a tide of iron and leather, their war cries carrying across the plain. Arrows darken the sky. Cyrus's infantry forms tight ranks, shields overlapping, spears bristling. The cavalry surges forward to meet the rider's head on the clash of impact echoing like thunder. The fighting is fierce, chaotic. Horsemen wheel and strike loosing arrows at point-blank range. Spears find gaps in armor. Swords flash and vanish in the press of bodies. Dust and frost mingle in the air, stinging the eyes. You see Cyrus at the heart of it, rallying his men, his voice cutting through the din. His cloak whips in the wind as he signals for the flanks to push forward, trying to encircle the nomads. But the massage tai are too swift. They break contact before the trap can close, reforming at a distance, then plunging back into the fray from a different angle. Each charge takes its toll, wearing down the Persians' lines. As the sun arcs low in the sky, the battle swells toward its climax. Thamyris herself, if the accounts are to be believed, rides at the head of her warriors, a tall figure in a scarlet cloak, her golden scale armor gleaming in the fading light. She drives straight toward the Persian center, cutting into the press with relentless precision. Around her, the massagetae fight with the ferocity of those defending their very way of life. When dusk finally creeps across the plain, the ground is littered with the debris of war, broken arrows, shattered shields, the still forms of the fallen. The massagetae hold the field. The Persians, bloodied and weary, fall back toward the river. It is here that the final curtain of the story draws in shadow. Herodotus claims that Thamyris found Cyrus's body among the dead, fulfilling her vow to take his life. Other sources suggest he fell in battle, but was recovered by his men. Still others, Persian records especially, are silent on the exact details, as though unwilling to set in stone the fate of their great king. What is certain is that Cyrus does not return from this campaign. The man who had risen from a shepherd's son to ruler of the greatest empire the world had yet seen, meets his end far from the marble halls of Babylon, or the gardens of Pasargadae, on a cold plain under a boundless sky. The massagetae carry their dead away in silence. The Persians do the same. And somewhere in the steppe wind, the echoes of the battle fade into the vast emptiness. The journey home is heavy with silence. The winter wind scours the plains, tugging at cloaks and banners as the Persian army makes its slow retreat. The men ride with heads bowed, the steady clop of hooves, broken only by the creak of leather harnesses and the occasional snort of a weary horse. Somewhere within the guarded column lies the body of Cyrus the Great, wrapped with care, his armor cleaned, his sword laid across his chest. The officers speak in hushed tones. Even the campfires burn quieter at night, as if the flames themselves understand the weight of loss. Harpagus rides apart, his expression drawn tight, staring into the horizon, as if replaying every moment of the campaign. Croesus, who once faced Cyrus as an enemy and later advised him as a friend, keeps close to the bier, his weathered face unreadable. When the column finally reaches Persian soil, word spreads quickly. Villages fall silent. Farmers stop their ploughs in the fields. Merchants in the markets bow their heads. In Babylon, in Sardis, in the distant provinces, people gather to hear the news. The king, who spared enemies, who walked among his people, who united nations under a banner of respect, as much as power, is gone. Historians still argue over his burial place. Some say he was laid to rest in Pasargadae, in a small, dignified tomb of white limestone, its roof pitched like a humble house. Others claim his body never returned from the steppe. But in Pasargadae there is such a tomb, and for centuries pilgrims will come to stand before it, reading the inscription said to have been carved there. O man, I am Cyrus, who founded the empire of the Persians and was king of Asia. Do not begrudge me this little earth that covers my body. It is a fitting monument for a man whose greatness lay not in excess, but in proportion. The legacy he leaves behind is vast. His empire, stretching from the Aegean to the Indus, becomes the template for those who follow. His policy of respecting local customs and religions sets a precedent that even rivals will admire. His name will be remembered not only in Persian chronicles, but in the histories of Greece, in the sacred texts of the Jews, and in the stories of many peoples who lived under his rule. And yet, for all the grandeur, it is the smaller things that endure in memory. The shepherd boy spared by a herdsman's mercy, the young ruler who listened more than he spoke, the conqueror who could take the richest city in the world without burning it to the ground. As the empire mourns, life resumes, because it must. Crops are sown, caravans set out, markets open their stalls. But there is a sense whispered from soldier to merchant to farmer that they have lived in a golden age, one that may not come again in their lifetimes. For Cyrus, there is no final parade, no last triumphant march. His triumph lies in the quiet steadiness of his reign, in the fact that when people speak of him, they do so not with fear, but with a kind of reverence. He was a king who made himself worth following, and in the ancient world, that may have been the rarest power of all. Now the fires in the Persian camps are little more than embers, the night air cool and still. The long road of Cyrus's life has reached its end, but the story he wrote in the world remains in stone in memory, and in the living thread of those who still speak his name. You sit in the quiet imagining the open steppe where he fell, the wide sky turning slowly toward dawn. Somewhere far away a shepherd tends his flock in the same hills where a baby once lay hidden from a king's wrath. The wind carries no banners there, only the scent of grass and the soft bleating of sheep. Life goes on, unbroken, unhurried. The empire he built will pass through many hands. Some will honor his vision, others will squander it. But for now it stands the roads he ordered, built still carrying traders and travelers, the cities he spared still humming with life, the policies he shaped, still keeping the peace between peoples who once saw each other only as enemies. It is easy to think of kings in terms of battles, crowns, and monuments, but perhaps the truest measure of a ruler is the space he leaves behind for others to live fully. Cyrus, in his way, understood this. He fought fiercely when he had to, but he also knew when to open his hand. That balance between the sword and the open palm is what kept his empire whole. As the stars brighten over the darkened plains, you let your breathing slow. The details of his campaigns fade, replaced by the image of a rider moving steadily across the horizon, not toward conquest, but toward the next conversation, the next decision, the next life to touch. And with that image, you feel the weight of history settle into stillness. The roads are quiet now. The king sleeps, and it is time for you to do the same.